On a desolate, rain-swept night, a young girl, barely more than a child, makes an impossible choice. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with sorrow, she gently places 3 tiny bundles, newborn triplets, on the cold, imposing doorstep of Malcolm Wynn's mansion. Her fragile silhouette vanishes into the darkness, leaving behind a profound mystery. Malcolm, a reclusive millionaire isolated in his own grief, watches this unbelievable scene unfold on his security cameras. Initially confused, then deeply disturbed, an unusual instinct compels him to step out into the storm. He finds the infants, small and vulnerable, but his gaze is drawn irresistibly to the path the girl took. Driven by a torment he can't explain, Malcolm follows her into the city's forgotten streets, far from his world of privilege. What he discovers next shatters his perception. A scene of unimaginable desperation, a dying mother, and the profound, selfless love behind an act he had utterly misjudged. This shocking truth not only reveals why those precious lives were left at his door, but also ignites a fierce protectiveness within Malcolm, compelling him to fight for a family he never knew he needed. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The biting wind whipped around June, tearing at her thin clothes and chilling her to the bone. Each gust felt like a physical assault, but she pushed against it, her progress agonizingly slow. In her arms, a burden both precious and unbearable, were the 3 tiny bundles, their combined weight a constant, aching reminder of the impossible choice she was making. Her arms, though strong from years of carrying burdens far beyond her years, trembled with the effort. Her legs, too, protested with every weary step, each muscle screaming for rest, but there was no rest to be found, not yet. Her face, a canvas of deep exhaustion, was etched with lines that belied her mere 16 years. Dark circles rimmed her tired eyes, but within those depths, a fierce, unyielding determination burned, a tiny, flickering flame against the vast, oppressive darkness of the night. The rain, cold and relentless, plastered strands of her hair to her forehead, blurring her vision, yet she kept her gaze fixed on the imposing silhouette of Malcolm Wynn's mansion. It loomed ahead, a fortress of wealth and solitude, starkly contrasting with the fragile, trembling hope she carried. Each of the triplets, nestled tightly against her, let out soft, intermittent whimpers, fragile sounds that pierced the desolate silence, a haunting melody of innocence and profound need. Their small cries were a constant, desperate plea, echoing the turmoil in her own heart. She adjusted their blankets, murmuring reassurances she barely believed herself, her voice hoarse with unshed tears and the raw ache of what she was about to do. This was not merely an act of desperation, it was an act of profound love, the only path she saw to a future, however distant and unimaginable, for these 3 tiny lives. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, a visceral agony that threatened to buckle her knees, but the unwavering certainty that this was the only way propelled her forward, one agonizing step after another, toward the inevitable, heartbreaking conclusion of her journey. The grand, imposing facade of Malcolm Wynn's mansion, illuminated by sporadic flashes of distant lightning, loomed closer, its windows dark and uninviting, mirroring the cold finality of her decision. June reached the heavy oak door, its polished surface reflecting the faint glow of the street lamp behind her. Her breath hitched in her throat, a dry, rasping sound. With meticulous care, born of deep love and utter desperation, she knelt on the cold stone, her movements slow and deliberate, each motion imbued with the weight of 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. First, she gently lowered the smallest of the triplets, adjusting the folds of the blanket around his tiny form, ensuring he was as protected as possible from the biting elements. Then the second, her fingers brushing his soft cheek, a fleeting touch that conveyed volumes of unspoken affection and sorrow. Finally the third, whose whimpers were now softer, almost a plea, received the same tender placement. She straightened each blanket, tucking them snugly around the sleeping infants, her hands lingering for a moment on their delicate heads, imprinting the feel of their soft hair on her memory. Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears, scanned their faces, memorizing every curve, every tiny feature, a desperate attempt to engrave their essence onto her soul before the inevitable separation. This was not a casual abandonment, it was a heart-wrenching act of surrender, a mother's last agonizing effort to ensure her children's survival. There was no knock, no hesitation, no plea for mercy. The act was complete. Her shoulders, already stooped from the physical exertion and the emotional weight she carried, seemed to curve even further inward, not just from the relentless cold and the persistent, soaking rain, but from the crushing finality of her actions. It was as if she were leaving not just the 3 precious bundles on the doorstep, but a vital, irreplaceable piece of herself, a part of her soul, irrevocably severed and left behind in the dark, lonely night. Inside the mansion, bathed in the cool blue glow of his security monitors, Malcolm Wynne watched. His finger hovered over the remote, ready to dismiss what he initially perceived as a late-night delivery, perhaps an unexpected package or a courier lost in the storm. The image on the screen, however, was stubbornly refusing to resolve into the expected mundane transaction. The black and white feed showed a slender, almost skeletal figure, shrouded by the driving rain, bending low at his front door. He squinted, a frown deepening on his brow. The form was too small, too fragile to be a typical delivery person, and the movements were too deliberate, too tender for a simple drop-off. As the figure knelt, carefully placing the bundles on his doorstep, a profound unease began to settle in the pit of his stomach, a disquiet that grew with each passing second. It wasn't the usual irritation he felt at disturbances to his solitary, carefully constructed routine. This was something far deeper, more unsettling. The cold, sterile reality of the security footage, devoid of color, paradoxically made the scene more stark, more visceral. He saw the girl, small and dark-skinned, her posture one of profound exhaustion and despair, leaving what clearly appeared to be 3 infants on his threshold. The sight was a raw, jarring chord struck deep within him, resonating with a strange, unfamiliar torment in his gut. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in years, a prickling awareness that shattered the carefully constructed apathy he had built around himself since his own insurmountable loss. The image, stark and uncompromising, mirrored the emptiness within him, an emptiness he had thought immune to external influence. This was not a parcel, this was a plea, a profound act of desperation unfolding on his very doorstep, a stark, undeniable challenge to his isolated existence. The unsettling torment in Malcolm's gut propelled him from his chair with an urgency that surprised even himself. His movements were uncharacteristically swift, a stark contrast to his usual measured, almost lethargic pace. His loyal governess, Mrs. Higgins, emerged from the shadows of the dimly lit hallway, her expression a mix of concern and bewilderment at his sudden, uncharacteristic haste. "Mr. Wynne, is everything all right?" she inquired, her voice hushed, but he merely waved a dismissive hand, his focus singular, almost feverish. He didn't wait for her reply, already striding towards the grand front doors, the heavy wood groaning in protest as he unlatched them. The cold, wet night air immediately enveloped him, a shock to his senses after the warmth of the mansion, but he barely registered it. His eyes, usually distant and preoccupied, were now fixed, piercing the gloom, searching for the source of the profound disquiet that had shattered his carefully cultivated solitude. And then he saw them. Three small, swaddled bundles huddled together on the polished stone, their presence a stark, undeniable reality against the vastness of the imposing entrance. Their faint whimpers, now audible above the persistent patter of the rain, were a fragile, desperate sound that cut through the silence of the night, reaching deep into a part of him he thought had long since withered. He knelt, his movements stiff, unfamiliar, his gaze sweeping over the tiny, vulnerable faces, each one a minuscule mirror reflecting a vast, unknown future. Gently, almost reverently, he lifted the first bundle, then the second, and finally the third, carefully handing them to the now thoroughly shocked Mrs. Higgins. Her gasp was barely audible, but her eyes widened in profound astonishment as she cradled the unexpected arrivals. Malcolm, however, remained rooted to the spot, his own gaze already fixed, not on the infants he had just retrieved, but on the direction from which June had vanished into the impenetrable darkness, a new, unsettling question stirring within the depths of his isolated soul. The slick, rain-swept streets mirrored the turmoil within Malcolm Wynne as he pursued the fading silhouette of June. He had left his sleek, expensive car idling by the curb a few blocks back, its luxurious interior feeling suddenly incongruous with the raw urgency that now propelled him forward on foot. The air was heavy with the scent of damp asphalt and distant unseen grime, a stark contrast to the manicured perfection of his own estate. His expensive leather shoes, usually reserved for polished marble floors, slapped against the uneven pavement, the sound unnervingly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. He expected her to bolt, to disappear into the labyrinthine alleys, a desperate flight of someone escaping a monumental act. Yet she didn't run. She walked with a steady, melancholic purpose that was far more perplexing than any frantic sprint could have been. Her pace was unhurried, almost resigned, each step carrying a profound weight that resonated with him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. This wasn't the heedless rush of irresponsibility. It was the deliberate, almost ceremonial progression of someone completing a harrowing, inevitable task. He found himself questioning the very foundation of his initial judgment, the automatic assumptions of wealth and privilege that had colored his perception. This wasn't abandonment born of carelessness, but an act of preservation, a chillingly calculated decision made under duress, a distinction that began to claw at the edges of his insulated world. The determination in her slumped shoulders, even from a distance, spoke volumes of a will far stronger than her fragile frame suggested, drawing him further into the unfolding drama he had stumbled upon. He pushed on, the wind biting at his exposed skin, a constant reminder of the raw reality he was now willingly entering. As Malcolm pressed on, the urban landscape around him began to shed its veneer of affluence, revealing the grittier realities of the city's outskirts. The meticulously kept lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and overgrown vacant lots, the stately brick homes replaced by rows of aging apartment buildings, their facades scarred with fading paint and the vibrant, defiant marks of graffiti. The clean, crisp air he was accustomed to was slowly replaced by the acrid scent of exhaust fumes and damp, lingering decay. He felt increasingly displaced in his tailored suit, a stark anachronism against the backdrop of desperate lives. His polished shoes, once silent on the plush carpets of his mansion, now echoed loudly on the broken concrete, each step a jarring reminder of the vast chasm between his world and hers. He noted the subtle shift in the streetlights, from the warm, inviting glow of the wealthier districts to the harsh, flickering fluorescence of these forgotten streets. He saw windows patched with cardboard, curtains made from repurposed sheets, and doors that looked as if they had weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical. It was a world of visible struggle, a stark, undeniable contrast to the carefully curated existence he led, a reality he had intentionally distanced himself from for years. Yet the same strange, insistent torment in his gut that had driven him from his bed now urged him forward, a silent command he couldn't ignore. He tracked June through a maze of narrow streets and dimly lit alleys, her silhouette occasionally vanishing behind overflowing dumpsters or the skeletal branches of bare trees, only to reappear moments later, still moving with that unwavering melancholic purpose. The sheer scale of her quiet suffering, etched into the very fabric of these streets, began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart, forcing him to confront a truth far more complex than simple charity. June's path eventually led her to a nondescript apartment building, its brickwork stained with grime and age, its few visible windows either dark or haphazardly patched. The entryway was narrow and dimly lit, reeking of stale air and something indefinably sad. Malcolm, careful to remain unseen, approached a ground-floor window, its glass grimy and partially obscured by a torn curtain. He leaned in, peering through a small gap, his heart thudding an irregular rhythm against his ribs. What he saw inside froze him, erasing every preconceived notion he had carried, every last vestige of judgment. June was kneeling on the worn floor beside a flimsy, threadbare mattress. On the mattress lay a woman, her skin a pallid grey, her eyes vacant and distant, barely clinging to life. Her chest rose and fell, with agonizing slowness, each breath a fragile whisper in the stillness of the room. A dark, spreading stain on the mattress beneath her, a sickening pool of blood, told a grim, undeniable story of desperate illness and profound neglect. It was her mother, Camilla, undeniably dying, her frail hand clutched loosely in June's. The raw, visceral reality of the scene struck Malcolm with the force of a physical blow, stripping away his composure, leaving him exposed to a truth far more devastating than any material poverty he had ever witnessed. This was not a scene of irresponsibility. It was a tableau of unbearable love and agonizing sacrifice. The air in the cramped room, even through the glass, seemed thick with unspoken pain and the lingering scent of illness, a testament to the quiet, unimaginable suffering that had unfolded within those walls. June's voice, a raw, fragile whisper, broke the heavy silence of the room, cutting through the thin glass of the window and piercing Malcolm's carefully constructed detachment. "They're safe now," she murmured, her face pressed against her mother's cooling hand, the words barely audible but resonating with an undeniable, heartbreaking finality. The sound was a sob disguised as a statement, a profound confession of unimaginable anguish and unwavering love. As she spoke, her shoulders shook with silent, convulsive sobs, a physical manifestation of the immense burden she had just relinquished, and the even greater one she now carried. Malcolm watched, frozen, as June gently placed her mother's hand back on the mattress, her movements slow, deliberate, a silent farewell to the only anchor she had left. He saw her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, lift to the ceiling, a silent, desperate prayer, or perhaps a plea for understanding, from a world that had offered her so little. In that single, heart-wrenching moment, the full, devastating weight of June's actions crashed over Malcolm. The abandonment he had witnessed minutes earlier was not an act of callous disregard, but a desperate, agonizing sacrifice born from the purest form of love and an unwavering, visceral need to protect. It was a choice forced upon her by circumstances so dire, so utterly hopeless, that her only path to ensuring the survival of her infant siblings was to relinquish them to a world she knew could, at the very least, offer them a chance at life, a chance she could no longer provide. This wasn't a choice. It was a profound, selfless act of preservation, a mother's last, desperate gamble against the crushing weight of inevitable loss. The profound love June held for her dying mother and her tiny siblings radiated from her, a palpable force that transcended the squalor of the room, leaving Malcolm utterly speechless and irrevocably changed. Malcolm Wynne returned to June's apartment the following day, not with an entourage of assistants or a retinue of medical professionals, but alone, without explanation, just a solitary knock on the worn wooden door. The opulent comfort of his own mansion felt distant, almost irrelevant, after the raw reality he had witnessed hours before. He stood there, a man accustomed to having doors open for him, now waiting with an unfamiliar tremor of apprehension. The air around him was still damp from the previous night's rain, carrying the faint, lingering scent of urban decay, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic efficiency of his usual world. When June finally opened the door, her eyes, though still deeply shadowed with exhaustion, held a chilling clarity that startled him. There was no anger, no resentment, only a profound, almost unsettling blankness that seemed to pierce through his carefully constructed facade. Her gaze was not accusatory, but rather it held a quiet, discerning assessment, as if she were weighing his presence, measuring his intent against the backdrop of her own insurmountable burdens. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to explain himself, to justify his intrusion, but the words caught in his throat. This wasn't a situation that called for elaborate explanations or grand gestures. This was a moment for stark, unvarnished truth, for an unspoken understanding that transcended words. He simply stood there, his presence a silent question. The stillness between them was broken only by the faint, ragged breath of someone struggling for air from deeper within the apartment, a harrowing reminder of the fragile life teetering on the edge of existence inside. He felt a peculiar blend of trepidation and resolve, knowing that the fragile bridge he was attempting to build could crumble with a single misstep. But the torment in his gut, now less a torment and more a quiet insistence, urged him forward. He swallowed, the silence feeling immense, and spoke her name, a simple question. "June?" She nodded, her gaze unwavering, a silent acknowledgement. He could see Camilla, June's mother, lying on the old mattress behind her, her form almost skeletal, barely a whisper of life clinging to her frail body. Her eyes, open but unseeing, were fixed on some distant point, lost in the haze of her failing consciousness. The reality of Camilla's imminent death hung in the air, a heavy, unspoken truth that permeated every corner of the small apartment. June, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, explained her mother's refusal of outside help, the deep-seated fear that any intervention would lead to her being taken away, a fear that June, in her own desperate loyalty, understood and honored. "She doesn't want them to take her," June said, her words a quiet indictment of a system that often stripped the most vulnerable of their dignity and autonomy. Malcolm understood instantly and deeply the profound trust June had placed in him by simply opening the door, by allowing him to witness the raw, unvarnished truth of their existence. This wasn't about medical treatment, it was about honoring a dying wish, about providing solace and dignity in the face of inevitable loss. He didn't offer grand solutions or empty promises. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash, a gesture he thought would be practical, immediate help. But June recoiled, not in anger, but in a quiet, resolute refusal. Her gaze remained steady, rejecting the easy path of financial assistance, signaling a boundary he hadn't anticipated. It was a rejection not of help itself, but of a specific kind of help, one that carried the connotations of charity, of a handout, rather than a genuine connection. Undeterred by her refusal of the money, Malcolm left, but he returned later that day, and then again the next, his approach subtly shifting. He didn't bring cash this time. Instead, his subsequent visits were marked by the quiet delivery of practical necessities. Following June's unspoken cues, he began to arrive with bags filled with infant formula, tiny clothes, and soft blankets for the triplets, items June had silently conveyed she needed for the newborns he had taken in. For Camilla, he brought soft, breathable sheets, gentle lotions to soothe her drying skin, and small, easily digestible foods that June might be able to coax her mother to consume. Each item was carefully chosen, a direct response to June's unvoiced needs, gleaned from the brief glimpses into her world and the silent, almost imperceptible lists her eyes conveyed. There were no grand pronouncements, no patronizing explanations, just the quiet placement of goods, an offering devoid of overt charity. June, for her part, never asked for anything for herself. Not once did she mention her own weariness, her hunger, or her profound need for rest. Her focus remained entirely on the well-being of her mother and the infants. This unwavering selflessness, a stark contrast to the transactional nature of his own privileged world, began to earn Malcolm's profound respect. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in their dynamic, built not on words or elaborate agreements, but on a rhythm of shared understanding. Their burgeoning relationship was established on a foundation of need, effort, and silence, each element a crucial pillar supporting the fragile bridge they were building between their vastly different lives. As the days turned into a silent routine, Malcolm began to observe June with a new level of understanding. He saw that she wasn't asking for help in the traditional sense, not begging for handouts or seeking pity. Instead, she was managing a crisis, an impossibly complex and heartbreaking situation, with a quiet competence that bordered on awe-inspiring. Her acceptance of his offerings was not one of gratitude for charity, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of shared purpose, of a partnership forged in the crucible of necessity. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for a consistent, reliable resource, someone who could fill the gaps she simply couldn't, given the insurmountable odds stacked against her. Malcolm began to grasp that June wasn't seeking fleeting acts of kindness, but a steadfast presence, a consistent stream of support that would allow her to continue her vigilant care for her dying mother and the vulnerable infants. The weight of her responsibility was immense, and his silent contributions were not alleviating it entirely, but rather providing the necessary tools for her to continue bearing it. This realization profoundly altered Malcolm's perspective. It shifted his perception from an act of benevolent intervention to one of collaborative survival. He wasn't merely giving, he was participating, becoming an unspoken, almost invisible partner in June's heartbreaking struggle, recognizing that true help wasn't about grand gestures, but about consistent, reliable presence. He was no longer just a wealthy man providing charity. He was becoming a bridge, a quiet, consistent connection to a world that desperately needed him, even if June wouldn't articulate it aloud. The opulent silence of Malcolm Wynn's mansion, once a sanctuary for his profound grief, slowly began to fracture, replaced by the soft, insistent murmurs of new life. The arrival of the triplets had not been a gentle ripple, but a seismic shift, sending tremors of change through every polished corridor and hushed chamber. It was Mrs. Ellery, the steadfast governess, who, with her practical wisdom and an innate understanding of human need, christened them. Noel, she declared, bestowing a name upon the tiny girl, her choice inspired by the proximity to Christmas, a time of gifts and new beginnings. For the two boys, she chose Elias and Samuel, each name echoing a sense of ancient promise and unexpected blessing. Malcolm, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, initially balked at the names, a subtle resistance against the full embrace of this unforeseen parenthood. He found himself stumbling over them, preferring to refer to the infants simply as the babies. Yet the relentless rhythm of their needs, the feeding, the changing, the comforting, began to chip away at his reserve. He found himself drawn into their world, an unspoken current pulling him from the solitude of his study to the nursery, where their tiny cries and gurgles became the unexpected soundtrack to his days. The mechanical process of caring for them slowly transformed into something more profound. He discovered a forgotten comfort in the weight of a sleeping infant in his arms, a sense of quiet purpose in soothing their cries. He began to tell them stories, hushed narratives of old legends and distant lands, his voice, once reserved for terse commands, softening into a gentle cadence. This rediscovery of paternal instinct, long dormant beneath layers of pain and isolation, was not a conscious choice, but an organic unfolding, a testament to the powerful, transformative presence of the three small beings who had so unexpectedly breached the walls of his carefully guarded existence. Their very presence was a quiet, insistent demand for life, forcing him to engage, to feel, to simply be present in a way he hadn't for years. June, too, found a tentative new rhythm within the mansion's walls. Her initial caution, a carefully constructed shield forged by years of hardship, slowly began to yield to the consistent care and unspoken understanding offered by Malcolm. She had initially kept to the periphery, a silent observer in this unfamiliar, opulent world, but the undeniable needs of the triplets drew her in. She began to assist Mrs. Ellery with the babies, her movements precise and infused with a quiet, almost instinctive care that belied her young age. Her hands, though small, were remarkably adept at cradling and comforting, her touch gentle and reassuring. She fed them, changed them, and rocked them back to sleep with a natural ease that surprised Malcolm, a silent testament to her deep, innate connection to the children she had left on his doorstep. One afternoon, as she tickled Elias's tiny foot, a soft, almost ethereal sound escaped her lips: laughter. It was a clear, pure sound, unexpected and bright, echoing through the once silent nursery. The baby gurgled in response, his small hand reaching out to grasp her finger, and June's smile widened, a fleeting but profound moment of unburdened joy. For Malcolm, witnessing this simple, genuine display of happiness was a profound turning point. It was more than just a sound. It was a revelation. It signaled the tentative return of a part of June that had been lost, buried beneath layers of grief and responsibility. It was a glimpse into the girl she might have been, the girl she still had the potential to be. Her laughter, fragile yet resonant, became a melody of burgeoning hope, a testament to the healing power of connection and the quiet return of innocence in a life that had known far too little of it. It was in that moment that Malcolm understood the true depth of the burden she had carried, and the quiet resilience that was now, finally, finding a moment to breathe. Observing June's quiet strength and her unspoken artistic inclination, Malcolm offered her a simple gift, a pristine block of drawing paper and a set of professional-grade pencils. It was a gesture born not of pity, but of a growing respect for her inherent resilience and the glimmer of creativity he had observed in her. June accepted them with a quiet nod, her eyes reflecting a flicker of surprise, a rare moment of something akin to delight. Later he found her in a sunlit corner of the drawing room, her brow furrowed in concentration, her nimble fingers working with a delicate precision that spoke of innate talent. What she drew were not grand landscapes or intricate portraits, but stars. Dozens of them in varying sizes and luminosity scattered across the page, some trailing delicate lines as if in motion, others shimmering with an inner light. When he approached, she looked up, a faint, almost shy smile touching her lips. "My mother always said," June murmured, her voice soft, imbued with a quiet reverence, "that every baby is a new star. They bring light into the world." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply within Malcolm, illuminating a truth he had long forgotten in his own darkened world. The image of the stars, symbols of hope and destiny, combined with the fragile, burgeoning lives of the triplets, began to coalesce into a powerful, almost spiritual inspiration. It was a vision that transcended the immediate needs of the children and extended to a broader understanding of purpose, of the interconnectedness of life, and the enduring power of new beginnings. Her profound words became a catalyst, sparking an idea that had been dormant within him, an instinct to cultivate not just individual lives, but collective hope. Inspired by June's profound words and the undeniable presence of the triplets, Malcolm found a new, compelling purpose that began to fill the void within him. He thought of the abandoned municipal building he had passed countless times, a decaying husk of what was once a vibrant community hub. A vision began to form in his mind, not just a renovation, but a transformation, a beacon of hope in a city often overshadowed by its own struggles. He envisioned it as a place where children, like June's siblings, could find safety, care, and a chance at a brighter future. He decided to convert it into a state-of-the-art children's shelter, a sanctuary where vulnerability would be met with unwavering support. With a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years, he commissioned architects and builders, demanding that the project be expedited with the utmost care and attention to detail. This endeavor was not merely a philanthropic gesture. It was a deeply personal undertaking, a testament to the profound shift within his own soul. He decided to name it the Camila Rios Children's Shelter, a silent, powerful tribute to June's mother, acknowledging the ultimate sacrifice she had made and the love that had transcended even death. The name was a promise, a commitment to honor Camilla's memory by providing a haven for others. When he shared his plans with June, her eyes, usually so guarded, widened with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Without a word, she reached for a piece of paper and with swift, practiced strokes, drew a single, radiant star. "For the plans," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a rare warmth blooming in her eyes. Malcolm understood immediately. It was a symbol of hope, a silent blessing, a tangible representation of the light that every child brought into the world, now to be enshrined above the very blueprint of their future, a beacon of hope. Camila Rios died peacefully in the quiet solitude of Malcolm Wynn's guest house, surrounded by a dignity that had been absent from much of her life. Her passing was not a violent struggle, but a gentle fading, a breath leaving her frail body as silently as it had entered. June, present at her mother's side, bore witness to this final intimate moment with a painful grace that astounded Malcolm. There were no dramatic outbursts, no desperate pleas, just a quiet, profound acceptance that etched itself onto her young face. Her hand, intertwined with her mother's, remained there long after Camilla's breath ceased, a silent bond refusing to sever even in death. This acceptance wasn't apathy. It was the quiet strength of someone who had long understood the inevitability of loss, yet still found the courage to embrace the finality of it. For June, Camilla's death was not just the end of a life, but the closing of a chapter, the last physical link to a past defined by hardship and an unbreakable maternal bond. Malcolm observed her, a silent witness to her quiet grief, and found himself humbled by her composure. The guest house, a place of temporary solace, had now become a sanctuary for a final farewell, a space where pain and peace converged in a quiet, solemn dance. The air hung heavy with a sense of completion, a poignant hush that settled over the small room, marking the profound end of a life that, though often overlooked, had left an indelible mark on those who truly knew its strength. The modest funeral was held in a small, unassuming chapel, a stark contrast to the grand, elaborate ceremonies Malcolm usually attended. The minister, a kind but clearly unfamiliar face, stumbled through the eulogy, mispronouncing Camilla's name multiple times, his words generic and devoid of true understanding. Each misstep, each impersonal phrase chipped away at Malcolm's composure, igniting a slow, burning sense of injustice within him. He watched June, her face a mask of quiet endurance, and felt a surge of protective anger. This woman, who had fought so bravely for her children, who had imparted such strength and resilience to her daughter, deserved more than an anonymous, clumsy farewell. Unable to bear the sterile disservice any longer, Malcolm rose from his pew, the rustle of his expensive suit the only sound in the small, hushed room. He walked to the front, his gaze fixed on June, and began to speak, his voice usually so controlled, imbued with an unexpected warmth and conviction. He spoke not of accolades or achievements, but of the woman he had come to know through June's silent devotion, Camila Rios, the tenacious seamstress whose nimble fingers had stitched not just fabric, but a legacy of unwavering determination into her daughter's spirit. He spoke of her quiet strength, her fierce love, and the profound impact she had on June, shaping her into the formidable young woman who stood before them. As he spoke, June, who had remained stoic throughout the service, reached out a hand and lightly touched his arm, a brief, almost imperceptible gesture that conveyed a silent confirmation, a profound acknowledgement of his words, and a deep, unspoken gratitude for his recognition of her mother's true essence. It was a shared moment of raw, authentic grief, a connection forged in the quiet power of memory and truth. The fragile peace established after Camilla's funeral was shattered by the stark, bureaucratic reality of the family services system. The news hit Malcolm like a physical blow. Family services intended to separate June from the triplets. The shock was immediate, visceral, giving way to a cold dread that seized his gut. Panic, a sensation he rarely experienced, began to churn within him. The thought of June, who had sacrificed everything for her siblings, being torn away from them, or the triplets, who had just begun to settle into a semblance of stability, being scattered to different foster homes, was unbearable. It flew in the face of everything he had come to understand about love, family, and the profound connections he had witnessed between them. His logical, ordered mind grappled with the cold, impersonal logic of the system, a system that saw only legal definitions and protocols, not the complex tapestry of care and sacrifice that bound this nascent family together. He had believed that taking the children in, providing a safe, stable home, would be enough. Now he faced the daunting reality of a legal battle, a fight against an unseen, unfeeling opponent that threatened to undo all the quiet progress they had made. The thought of those tiny lives, so recently brought into his world, being ripped away by bureaucratic decree, ignited a fierce, protective instinct within him, one he hadn't known he possessed. He felt an overwhelming urgency, a desperate need to act, to fight, to protect this fragile family that had so unexpectedly woven itself into the fabric of his once solitary life. As Malcolm grappled with the looming threat, June approached him, her face unusually soft, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding of the impending battle. In her hand, she held a small, simple photo frame. Inside, a picture, Malcolm looking uncharacteristically gentle, holding one of the triplets, a tiny, sleeping bundle. Below the image, in June's precise, almost childlike handwriting, was a caption: "If I disappear, don't let him forget his name." The words were a quiet plea, a stark reminder of her deepest fear, not for herself, but for the identities and bonds of her siblings. It was a testament to her enduring love, a desperate attempt to ensure their connection to each other, even if she were to be forcibly removed from their lives. The small frame, the faded photograph, and June's earnest gaze ignited a renewed, unshakable resolve within Malcolm. The panic subsided, replaced by a steely determination. This was no longer just about protecting the children. It was about honoring June's sacrifice, about cementing the familial bond that had formed so unexpectedly. He knew then, with absolute clarity, that he would initiate the legal guardianship process. He wouldn't just fight for them. He would formalize their place in his life, in the world. He immersed himself in the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the legal system, a world of complex paperwork, court dates, and endless waiting periods. June accompanied him to every meeting, every interview, a silent, unwavering presence by his side. Her quiet confidence, her implicit trust in his efforts, became a powerful motivator, a testament to the profound bond that had formed between them. It was a partnership forged in adversity, a shared commitment to building a family against all odds, guided by a singular, unyielding purpose. The ink on the guardianship documents was barely dry, but for June, the act of signing felt like an unburdening, a profound release. As she put the pen down, a small, tentative smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile Malcolm had seen grace her face since the somber day of her mother's funeral. It wasn't a broad, joyous laugh, but a quiet, almost shy upturn of her mouth, a subtle shift that spoke volumes of the immense weight that had just been lifted from her young shoulders. The formal process, a bureaucratic hurdle that had once loomed large, had now solidified the fragile family unit they had so painstakingly built. This simple act marked the official beginning of their new reality, transforming an unexpected guardianship into a true, undeniable family. In the days that followed, Malcolm's grand mansion, once a bastion of hushed solitude and stately silence, began to breathe with a new, vibrant life. The echoing halls now resonated with the charming chaos of infancy, the gurgling contentment of the triplets, the occasional plaintive cries, and the rhythmic creak of rocking chairs. It was the murmur of real, consistent, and unfabricated life, a stark contrast to the manufactured quiet Malcolm had previously embraced. Mealtimes, once formal and solitary affairs, transformed into lively, if somewhat messy, gatherings. The food, though simple, was imbued with a new kind of meaning, a shared sustenance that nourished not just their bodies, but the burgeoning bonds between them. Malcolm, to his own surprise, found himself falling into the comforting routine of inventing story endings for the babies, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the nursery as he spun tales of brave heroes and whimsical adventures, his imagination rekindled by the innocent wonder reflected in their tiny, attentive faces. Each day brought a new layer of connection, weaving them together into a tapestry of shared moments and quiet joys. June, now officially a part of this unexpected household, found herself slowly shedding the deep-seated caution that had defined her existence. The constant vigilance, the gnawing anxiety that had been her shadow for so long, began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of security. She moved through the mansion with a newfound ease, her presence no longer that of a hesitant guest, but a vital, integral member of the family. The burden of poverty she had carried, not just financial destitution, but the soul-crushing scarcity that robbed one of time, hope, and warmth, slowly began to lift. One quiet evening, as the triplets slept soundly in their nursery and Malcolm read aloud from an old, leather-bound book in the living room, June looked up, her gaze thoughtful. "We're not poor anymore, are we?" she asked, her voice soft, almost reflective. The question wasn't about money. It was about the profound emptiness she had known, the relentless pressure of survival that had overshadowed every aspect of her life. It was a question about the emotional and spiritual poverty that had stolen her childhood and forced impossible choices upon her. Malcolm paused, his eyes meeting hers, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. He saw the flicker of vulnerability, the yearning for reassurance in her gaze. "No," he replied, his voice firm, imbued with a quiet certainty. "Not in a way that matters." His answer wasn't a platitude, it was a truth, a recognition of the intangible richness that now filled their lives, the abundance of care, security, and belonging that transcended mere material wealth. In that moment, June realized that this grand mansion, once a symbol of his isolated fortune, had become, truly and profoundly, a home for all of them, a sanctuary where the shadows of her past could finally begin to fade. The mansion, once a testament to Malcolm's solitary wealth, had transformed into a vibrant, bustling sanctuary, resonating with the consistent and undeniable presence of the triplets. Their laughter, their cries, their innocent babbling filled every room, weaving a new tapestry of sound that replaced the echoing silence. Noel, with her captivating, curious gaze, began to explore the world with tentative crawls, her tiny fingers reaching for everything within her grasp. Elias, ever the boisterous one, delighted in loud squeals and exuberant kicks, his energy infectious. Samuel, the most contemplative of the three, observed his siblings and the adults with a serene, knowing patience, often offering a quiet smile that warmed the coldest corners of the room. Each child was developing their own distinct personality, a unique star shining brightly, as June's mother had once described. Malcolm, once a man consumed by the rigid structure of his business empire and the quiet sorrow of his past, found himself utterly captivated by their individual quirks and burgeoning traits. He spent hours on the floor, inventing games, reading storybooks with exaggerated voices, and simply observing their growth, a profound sense of joy blossoming within him. His life, once so focused on acquisition and control, had found a new, deeper purpose in the simple yet infinitely complex act of nurturing. This wasn't a temporary diversion. It was a profound, irreversible shift in his entire being. He had rediscovered not just the joys of parenthood, but a sense of intrinsic meaning that had eluded him for years, a testament to the transformative power of unconditional love and the unexpected beauty of a family found. The story culminates in an intimate, everyday scene that epitomizes the profound transformation. It is the holiday season, and the grand dining room, once reserved for stiff, formal gatherings, is now alive with the comfortable hum of family. Malcolm sits at the head of the table, his usual stern demeanor softened by the warmth of the moment, a relaxed smile gracing his lips. Across from him sits June, her face serene, no longer etched with the lines of desperation, but radiant with a quiet contentment. The three triplets, bundled in festive sleepwear, are nestled in high chairs around them, their small hands occasionally batting at stray crumbs or reaching for their sippy cups, their innocent babbling a joyful soundtrack to the scene. Above the roaring fire in the majestic fireplace, three brightly colored Christmas stockings hang, each meticulously embroidered with a name: Noel, Elias, and Samuel. They are not merely decorations. They are symbols of belonging, tangible representations of a future filled with warmth and celebration. In this moment, there is nothing missing, nothing that needs to be fixed or acquired. They have everything that truly matters, already sitting at the table, a testament to the profound shift from a life of profound scarcity to one of boundless abundance. As the evening deepens, June reaches out, her hand gently touching Malcolm's on the tabletop. It is a subtle gesture, a silent acknowledgement, a confirmation of the trust that has been painstakingly built between them, brick by fragile brick. In that quiet touch, all the struggles, all the sacrifices, and all the unspoken understanding coalesce, solidifying the unbreakable bond of a family forged not by blood alone, but by a shared journey of compassion, resilience, and the enduring power of hope. For more stories that matter, join our community. Subscribe to Jabat Stories.